Recent events on college campuses are prompting questions about free speech. This scene happened earlier this month at UC Hastings with progressive law students shouting down a speaker during a debate. A few weeks later, another incident broke out at Yale Law School with more than 100 students attempting to shout down a bipartisan panel on civil liberties. Joining us now, professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude Jr. Eddie, it's good to have you. A new op-ed in the Washington Post is entitled "Free Speech Doesn't Mean Hecklers Get to Shut Down Campus Debate." And it reads in part, quote, "Freedom of speech does not include a right to shout down others so they cannot be heard. It is profoundly disturbing that some students assert a right to determine what messages are acceptable on a campus and try to deprive others within the community of their right to invite or listen to speakers of their choice. If such a heckler's veto is allowed, the only speech that occurs will be that which no one cares enough to shout down,
Eddie, Erwin Chemerinsky wrote that, obviously dean of Berkeley Law School and a man greatly respected in the legal community. Let's just start with what he's the most concerned about, and I'm sure you share that concern, and that is the so-called heckler's veto, where somebody gets up to speak and they're shouted down, so no students get to hear what they have to say. Should there be any place in academic settings for a so-called heckler's veto?
Well, let me just say this, Joe. First of all, it's great to see both you and Mika. It is certainly the case that we need to cultivate an environment for free and open exchange and debate on college campuses. And for the most part, that happens. It happens every single day in places across the country. I agree with the basic premise of the op-ed. And the dean is an ally. He's been arguing in this terrain for decades. But I think he framed it properly. I think the framing is problematic here. I don't know if this is a question, if it's best thought of as free speech, Joe. I think it might be thought of better as what do we take to be acts of civil disobedience. So there are moments where students feel that particular speakers on campus are offensive. They represent a threat to their own standing and dignity within that space. And they make choices. They make choices to protest at that moment. And I think it's better to think about this as an act of civil disobedience and the consequences that follow from it than just simply a question of free speech.
Okay, so civil disobedience, there's a time and a place and a manner for civil disobedience, but certainly you have students who don't like what a speaker says, and they shut down the entire debate. And, in Yale, the Yale Federalist Society held a panel that featured Progressive American Humanist Association and somebody from the ADF, a conservative nonprofit, and because people were offended, they shouted down both the speakers. And we also, of course, had the example at UC Hastings College of Law. Right. We don't want our students to be so fearful of opposing opinions that they can't hear them, right?
Of the conversation.
Like, debate the conversation. If you were offended by somebody's viewpoint, let them speak.
So, of course, that's absolutely, it's central to how colleges and universities work. But just as we have in our politics, Joe, we have on university campuses. And what is that? We have people using liberal means for illiberal ends. So people will take advantage of the basic norms and values of universities and colleges in order to undermine those norms and values. What does it mean for people to come into college spaces and university spaces?
What do you mean? What do you mean, though? What do you mean, though? Because, I mean, we have situations where Condi Rice is not allowed to give speeches, commencement addresses. Christine Lagarde not allowed to give commencement addresses. I can go on and on. It has gotten ridiculous. People. Go ahead.
No, Joe. I think you're right in some instances, right? But at every moment that Condoleezza Rice wasn't allowed or was protested in terms of her delivering a commencement address, she gave another one. So we need to be very, very careful in how we're generalizing these moments to American higher ed broadly. And I'm very interested. So this is what I think, just really clearly, that people speak, they have a right to speak, and people have a right to respond. And you can't dictate the form and content of the response. Somebody may decide to slap somebody, right? But then there are consequences that follow from that, and they have to be aware of the consequences. That's an assault. Some people may decide to protest. It may very well result in their expulsion. They have to be aware of those consequences. But what I'm interested in more, Joe, is why is this at the heart of our concern about free speech and democracy when we have over 175 pieces of legislation introduced to target teachers, when we have 13 pieces of legislation passed in 11 states that are dictating what teachers can teach. But I'm saying that seems to me when people are leveraging state power to do this. Yeah, you do. I know.
No.
I just want to emphasize
this. I mean, no, you just want to change the subject, Daddy. I love you, my brother, but you just want to change the subject because anytime we talk about anything going on college campuses, you're like James Carville. Look at the bird over there. Look at the bird over there. I'm not going to look at the bird over there. No. This has been happening for too long. And again, civil disobedience. What great respect I have for students on either side of the ideological spectrum that have the courage to step out of where they feel safe and commit acts of civil disobedience. That's fine, but they have to be prepared to be asked to leave the room, and they need to leave the room at some point because, yes, you said, well, Condi Rice gets to speak in other places, but what if I'm a Rutgers student and I wanted to hear Condi Rice speak at my event, but she was canceled. She was not allowed. Or Christine Lagarde. What if I'm that student and I don't get a chance to hear that? Or let's say a conservative, and let's just say even a right-wing Trumpist wants to come and speak on a campus who has views that may be offensive to you and me, but there are students on that campus that want to hear it. And let me just say, as a conservative that grew up around liberals on college campuses that didn't like to hear opposing factors, I always told my liberal friends, you're only depriving yourself. You need to listen to what other people believe and sharpen your arguments against them. What do you say to that?
Well, Joe, I think obviously, I agree with the idea that colleges and universities should be open spaces of debate and inquiry, that we should not be engaged in shutting down opposing views. If you don't want to hear someone, don't go to the talk. I understand that. But I also understand this, that there are folks out here, there are people out here who are holding views that question the dignity and standing of people who inhabit these spaces. And what do I mean by that? If you call into question the underlying values and commitments that make universities and colleges work, that is, that everyone has equal standing and dignity. And that is the heart of open and free inquiry. If someone comes in using those values to call into question the very values, we threaten the very foundation of what we do in universities and colleges. That's the danger. That's the tightrope that we're walking here. We can't just simply allow any kind of speech. We don't do that in our politics.
Right.
And we have to be very, very thoughtful in this moment on university campuses, because there are authoritarian voices. There are folks who are trying in so many ways to choke the life out of the America that's coming into being, and we have to be very, very diligent in responding to them.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.